When you reject an avoidant, you're not just saying no to them. You're saying yes to yourself. You're flipping a script they have been writing for a very long time, a script where they hold the pen, where they decide when to engage and when to withdraw, when you get closeness and when you're left in silence. That power dynamic is what allows an avoidant to feel safe. They create a buffer between themselves and intimacy, because intimacy feels like danger to them. And for as long as you play along with that script, they get to keep their emotional world intact, control unchallenged. But the moment you take that control back, the moment you reject them, something very powerful happens. You disrupt their entire nervous system's prediction of how this dance is supposed to go. They expect you to keep chasing, to keep proving your worth, to keep trying to pull them closer. And when you calmly, confidently say, no, I won't play this game anymore, it sends a shockwave through them. What you have to understand is that avoidants are not immune to consequences. They just work very hard to convince themselves that they are. They tell themselves they don't need anyone, that they are fine on their own. That intimacy is a trap. But when you reject them, you introduce them to a new kind of consequence. The loss of something they thought they could control indefinitely. It's the one thing they were not prepared for, the experience of being chosen out of, instead of being the one doing the choosing. And here's where it gets fascinating. Psychologists have studied this dynamic, and what they find is that rejection activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. It actually hurts. And avoidants, despite their appearance of being emotionally detached, are no exception to that. In fact, for someone who has spent years building defenses to avoid emotional pain, that hurt feels even sharper, even more disorienting. Now, I'm not saying you reject them to hurt them. This isn't about revenge, it's about breaking the cycle. It's about showing up for yourself in a way that forces the entire system of that relationship to reorganize. Your refusal to participate in the old power dynamic is what gives you your freedom back. It's what reminds you that you're not just a supporting character in someone else's emotional drama. You are the author of your own story. When you do this from a place of grounded strength, not anger, not resentment, just clarity, you stop being reactive to their behavior. You stop living in response to their walls, their distance, their silence. And when you stop reacting, they lose the grip they had on your emotional state. That's what truly shocks them. Not the rejection itself, but the calm certainty with which you deliver it. And that's where your power lies. Because in that moment, you are no longer chasing their love. You are no longer negotiating for scraps of connection. You are standing in your own worth, and that's something no one can take away from you. So understand this, rejecting the avoidant is not about punishing them. It's about reclaiming yourself. It's about reversing the very dynamic that has kept you small, anxious, and waiting. And the beauty of that is, whether they change or not, you have already won. Because you refuse to abandon yourself one more time. Here's a 600-word expansion of key point 2, crafted to flow naturally with the style of your speech. What most people don't realize is that when you reject an avoidant, you're not just rejecting a person, you're triggering an entire psychological chain reaction. Their ego, which they've built like a fortress, suddenly takes a direct hit. Avoidants like to believe they're the ones holding the keys, deciding when to open up, when to pull away, when to give you closeness, when to take it away. That sense of control is what gives them stability. And when you flip the dynamic and say, no, I'm done, you don't just shut the door, you rip the doorframe off its hinges. This is where the shock really begins. For the first time, they're forced to sit with a feeling they have worked their entire lives to avoid powerlessness. That sense of control they were clinging to collapses, and with it, their carefully curated emotional identity starts to crack. Suddenly, they're not the one walking away. They're the one being walked away from. And that's an identity they don't know how to hold. Psychologically, this creates what I call emotional whiplash. Their nervous system has been calibrated to expect you to be there, waiting, available, ready to reassure them. When you're not, the brain scrambles to make sense of it. At first, there's denial. They'll come back, they always do. But when they realize you mean it, that denial quickly morphs into panic. Their ego feels threatened, and that's when you'll often see a reaction that looks like obsession. They might start checking your social media, replaying old conversations, even trying to pull you back in with small tests, just to see if they still have access to you. But here's the key insight. This is not necessarily love driving those behaviors. It's ego injury. It's the pain of losing the illusion that they were in control. And that pain can be one of the most powerful catalysts for growth, if they're willing to sit with it. From a philosophical standpoint, this moment is crucial because it's where the mask slips. The avoidant is forced to see that their strategy of detachment doesn't protect them from pain, it only postpones it. They come face to face with the truth that the very thing they fear, emotional vulnerability, is now unavoidable. And even though they may never admit it out loud, that realization shakes them to their core. For you, this is where the transformation deepens. Because when you see their ego collapse, you realize just how much power you actually had all along. You realize you were never as powerless as you felt. You were simply conditioned to believe that love meant waiting, proving, convincing. And when you step out of that conditioning, you not only free yourself, you hold up a mirror to them. Sometimes that mirror inspires change. Other times it just exposes the work they still refuse to do. But either way, you've already shifted the dynamic. You've gone from being the person begging for their attention to the person who commands respect. And that shift is permanent. Remember this, their reaction may look dramatic, it may look cold, it may look obsessive, but all of it is simply the sound of a broken system trying to put itself back together. Your job is not to manage that process. Your job is to stay anchored in your worth and let the dust settle where it may. Because the moment you stop chasing and start choosing, the game changes forever. And that, more than anything, is what truly shocks them. Here's a 600-word expansion of key point 3. Keeping the style consistent and flowing seamlessly with the first two. When you reject an avoidant, something extraordinary happens beneath the surface. Something they don't want you to see, and in many cases, they don't want to see themselves. Their hidden attachment needs, the ones they've been suppressing for years, begin to wake up. This is the part of them that has been buried under layers of self-protection, the part that actually does long for closeness, intimacy, and deep connection. And the moment you walk away, that part of them comes roaring to life. Avoidants spend most of their lives running from this internal truth. They build their identity around independence, self-sufficiency, and emotional distance because they fear the vulnerability of needing someone. It feels safer to tell themselves they don't need connection than to risk the pain of losing it. But when you reject them, you create a vacuum. And human nature hates a vacuum. Their emotional system, which has been carefully managed and numbed, suddenly gets flooded with a sense of loss they didn't prepare for. This is why you'll often see avoidants go into a stage of idealization after you walk away. They start remembering every good moment, every laugh, every connection you shared. They might replay your conversations, scroll through old messages, and even start fantasizing about what it would be like to have you back. But this time without the distance. They begin to feel a kind of longing that surprises them, because it's exactly what they've been working so hard to suppress. Here's what's really happening. Your rejection removes the safety net of emotional avoidance. They no longer get to decide when intimacy happens. They no longer get to hide behind silence or withdrawal. And with no place left to run, the deep need for connection they've been denying has no choice but to surface. It's like pressing on a bruise they've been pretending isn't there. Suddenly, all the pain and sensitivity they've been avoiding becomes impossible to ignore. This is why their reaction can sometimes feel so intense, even contradictory. On one hand, they may panic and try to pull you back in. On the other, they may lash out or act colder than ever. That's because they're wrestling with two powerful forces inside of them, the part that wants closeness and the part that fears it. And that internal conflict can be overwhelming. From a psychological perspective, this moment is one of the most revealing because it shows you the truth of who they are beneath the armor. For perhaps the first time, you're seeing their attachment wounds raw and unfiltered. You're witnessing their humanity. And whether they embrace it or resist it, they can't unfeel it. That's the beauty of this moment. It wakes something up in them that cannot be put back to sleep. For you, this is where your deepest growth happens. Because instead of being pulled back into their cycle, you now have the power to see their longing without losing yourself. You can recognize their need without making it your job to fix them. You can hold space for their awakening, or you can walk away entirely. But either way, you are in choice, not in chase. And that is the most powerful place you can stand. Because when you choose yourself, you're not just rejecting them. You're rejecting the idea that love has to come at the cost of your peace. You're showing them and yourself that connection can only exist when both people are fully present. And that truth, once awakened, changes everything. Would you like me to expand key point 4 next so the speech ends with a truly powerful closing segment that ties the entire message together and leaves your audience with an unforgettable final punch? Here's a 600-word expansion of key point 4, written to seamlessly follow the tone and energy of the earlier parts. Once you reject the avoidant and walk away, the most profound shift isn't in them, it's in you. Because what truly shocks them isn't just your absence, it's your transformation. They expected you to fall apart without them, to second-guess yourself, to eventually circle back with the same open heart they took for granted. But instead, they watch you rise. They watch you reclaim your focus, rebuild your life, and redirect the energy you once poured into chasing them toward your own growth. And that, more than anything, is what dismantles the old dynamic completely. See, when you've been entangled with an avoidant, your sense of self often gets distorted. You spend so much time trying to decode their silence, manage their moods, and prove your worth that you forget you were never supposed to earn love. You were meant to share it. So when you finally reject them, you reclaim all the energy you once invested in winning their approval and redirect it into something far more powerful, becoming whole again. This is where everything changes. Because you're no longer orbiting their world, you're building your own. And here's the paradox: while they may appear unmoved on the surface, deep down they feel it. They feel the shift in the energy dynamic. They're no longer the center of your emotional universe, and that destabilizes them more than they'll ever admit. It forces them to confront something they've avoided their entire lives, the reality that love is not control and distance is not strength. While they sit in that realization, you're rising. You start reclaiming the parts of yourself that were buried under the weight of that relationship, your passions, your purpose, your voice. You remember what it feels like to be alive without walking on emotional eggshells. And as you grow, Something subtle but powerful happens. You stop hoping they'll change. Because you've changed. The version of you that once accepted breadcrumbs simply no longer exists. This is the part that shocks them the most. Not just that you walked away, but that you never looked back. They expected your strength to be temporary, like a storm that would pass. But instead, they see it becoming permanent. And that forces them to question everything they believed about you and about themselves. Because if you could outgrow the dynamic, maybe they could have too, but they didn't. And here's the beautiful truth: whether they ever evolve or not is no longer your responsibility. Their journey is theirs. Yours is to keep becoming. Yours is to keep expanding into the version of yourself who no longer measures worth through someone else's ability to love you. Because in the end, rejecting the avoidant isn't just an act of defiance. It's an act of rebirth. It's declaring to the world and to yourself that your value is not up for debate, that your heart is not a proving ground, that your love will only be given where it can be received. And when you stand in that truth, unwavering, unapologetic, and free, that is when the entire paradigm breaks. That is when you stop waiting for their recognition and start living in your own. Because the greatest shock you can give an avoidant is thriving without them.